All right, welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into something incredibly fascinating and honestly a pretty provocative piece of analysis. We're going to be breaking down a text by researcher Ali Mohammed Al-Shurafa Al-Hammadi called The Attached Text. We're basically unpacking his really bold examination of the historical struggles within the Muslim world. The author presents this deeply controversial, yet super interesting perspective that the current state of disarray in the Muslim nation, well, it isn't some modern phenomenon. Rather, he argues it's the result of a profound historical departure from its foundational text. It's a massive claim that completely challenges centuries of traditional historical narrative. So let's map out exactly how he builds this argument step by step.
It leaves us with this massive question right out of the gate. How did a community that started with such a unifying message end up so deeply fractured? We're talking about a group of people who literally shared the exact same foundational teaching, yet they found themselves divided almost immediately. The researcher's core premise here is that the struggles we see today all stem from a single critical pivot point in history, and that point happened right after the Prophet's death. It's a fascinating argument because it places the root of our modern, highly complex issues squarely in those very first days of the post-prophetic era.
Section 1. The decisive moment in Islamic history. So to understand where things went off track, we kind of have to establish the baseline first, right? The text argues that the Prophet's departure was the ultimate test for the Muslim community. But, crucially, this wasn't a test of empty slogans or emotional devotion. No, it was a strict test of their commitment to God's law exactly as it was revealed. No human additions, no subtractions. According to Al-Hammadi, the Quran was intended to be the sole reference. It wasn't just left behind as a spiritual guide to read, but as a binding constitution. A constitution specifically designed to govern every single aspect of human relationships, rights, and duties. But almost immediately, the author argues, a really dangerous deviation occurred. The community shifted away from divine governance, which means managing affairs based strictly on the Quranic text, and they moved toward human judgment. Suddenly, major affairs were being managed through human interpretations that totally bypassed that binding divine text. According to the researcher, this was the exact moment the Quran was practically abandoned. Now, just to be super clear here, he doesn't mean abandoned in terms of recitation or daily reading. People were still doing that. He means it was entirely abandoned in its actual real-world governance and practical application.
Section 2. The shift to bloody conflict. Okay, so this single shift away from the divine text didn't just cause, a mild theological debate. It triggered an absolute catastrophic ripple effect throughout history. The author walks us through this rapid succession of historical traumas to make a really stark point about how quickly political disagreement escalated into devastating violence. We're talking about the assassination of 3 caliphs. Then, in the year 36 AH, you have the Battle of the Camel, where the Prophet's own cousin and his wife were literally on opposing sides of a bloody battlefield. A year later, the Battle of Siffin, once again fought between relatives. And the decades that followed were just completely consumed by endless Umayyad and Abbasid wars. The text points out that fighting for power very quickly became the rule rather than the exception.
Section 3. Justifying conflicts in religion's name.
So it's one thing that these violent events happened, but the researcher takes deep issue with how they were later canonized by historians. This brings up a really uncomfortable question. Traditionally, this early era is labeled as rightly guided, but the text asks, how can the concept of being rightly guided possibly be paired with internal wars, political assassinations, and the death of innocents, especially when there is absolutely zero clear Quranic reference to justify any of those actions?
And this brilliantly illustrates the massive gap the researcher identifies. On one side, you have what he calls the Quranic reality. This emphatically mandates rule by justice. It strictly forbids the spilling of blood and dictates that mere differences of opinion never, ever justify fighting. On the other side, we have the historical reality. In history, internal wars, targeted assassinations, and violent coups were somehow accepted and normalized as a standard model for Islamic governance.
To really hammer this point home, the author analyzes the Zakat wars. Now, these were the wars fought against those who withheld the obligatory charity, right after the Prophet's death. The text presents a highly controversial but exceptionally clear view here. It argues there is absolutely no Quranic mandate to fight anyone over acts of worship. None. According to the text, worship is fundamentally a private matter between a human and God, and accountability for it is explicitly delayed until Judgment Day. It's just not meant to be handled by an earthly ruler. The researcher views this specific historical event as the exact moment religion was transformed and weaponized into a tool for political oppression.
Section 4. The Quran reduced to mere rituals. So if the divine text was no longer the governing constitution, what did it become? The text argues there is a stark contrast between its original intent and its modern reality. The original purpose of the Quran, the author emphasizes, was to be a comprehensive book of guidance, legislation, and a literal roadmap for human peace and security. But today, the author asserts it has basically been reduced to mere recitation. It's become a prop for rituals, a source for superficial blessings, and a tool for prayers about livelihood. The sweeping divine methodology was just completely removed from practical daily life.
And it's like a domino effect from there, creating this whole cascade of deviations. First, you have Muslims living in hardship and misery, despite performing numerous acts of worship, simply because the actual blueprint for life was being ignored. Then, this internal moral decay led to armies launching massive expansionist wars into Persia and Europe. Campaigns that were executed in the name of Islam, sure, but completely detached from actual Quranic values. And ultimately, the caliphate devolved into what the author calls a biting monarchy. It became an institution changing hands through sheer force and political intrigue, entirely devoid of religious or moral deterrence.
Section 5. Returning to the divine reference. After mapping out all this historical departure, the text issues a really urgent call for reflection. The author leans heavily on the specific Quranic verse, a blessed book which we have revealed to you that they might reflect upon its verses and that those of understanding would be reminded. Given this very explicit divine instruction to reflect and to understand, he argues that it is completely illogical for the Quran to remain marginalized in society. It literally makes no sense for the sayings and interpretations of mere humans to dominate the historical and modern landscape as if they were the revealed religion itself. To sort of summarize his whole thesis, the author makes one thing absolutely crystal clear. The current state of the Muslim world is not the result of some grand external secret conspiracy. We aren't looking at a hidden plot here. Rather, the struggles are the direct, logical, and entirely natural consequence of historical choices made by the community itself. Specifically, it's the conscious choice to abandon God's law in favor of human judgment. And he backs this up with another foundational piece of evidence from the text, where the instruction is remarkably clear. Follow what has been revealed to you from your Lord, and do not follow other patrons besides him. History, the author argues, shows us exactly which path was taken. Humanity was given a very strict binary choice here, and the consequences of that choice have echoed through centuries. So where do we go from here? According to the text, these are the only two paths available moving forward. First is the path of guidance. This leads to tranquility and salvation, but it demands something difficult: actively returning the Quran to its rightful, active place as the ultimate judge and constitution. The alternative is the path of misery. This one is characterized by ongoing delusion, worldly hardship, continuous societal failure, and ultimate accountability in the hereafter. It's a stark warning, and the author notes that the Quran itself remains perfectly unchanged. It is literally only its position in our lives that requires correcting.
Which brings us to our final overarching question. Will the community actively return its foundational text to its rightful place as the governing constitution? Or will it just continue to wander, wondering why it remains lost? It's a super compelling, heavy framework for looking at history. It definitely gives us a lot to think about. Thanks for diving into this explainer with me today. Keep questioning and keep learning.
مؤسسة رسالة السلام العالمية، رسالة إنسانية لعالم أكثر سلاماً.